Merħba l-segwaċi ta' Markapaġna, jena Rachel Baldacchino u nilqakom dan l-episodju li jmiss. Kif tafu sew issa f'Markapaġna niltaqa' ma' kittieba, ma' ħassieba, riċerkaturi, akademiċi biex insir nafu aħjar permezz anke ta' testi lokali li informawhom b'xi mod jew ieħor f'ħajjithom. Illum ser inkun qiegħda nitkellem ma' Erika Giusta li hija kittieba u perita. Dan ħajkun il-tini episodju ta' Markapaġna li ħajsir bl-Ingliż. Erika Giustajla bażata Malta għal dawn l-aħħar 8 naħseb 9 snin mill-2015. L-aħħar hija taħdem bħala perita fil-kumpanija AP il-Belt Valletta. L-aħħar pubblikazzjoni tagħha deret fir-Routledge Handbook for Sustainable Heritage, hija kokittiba f'kapitlu minnhom li jismu Fort St. Angelo is not a billboard. U Erika Giusta hija kittiba wkoll fil-The Malta Art Paper fejn tikteb fuq l-arkitettura, fuq id-disinn u anke fuq l-arti kontemporanja. Thank you, Erika, for being here. I'm excited about this. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thank you, Rachel. I hope this is good enough.
Yes. No, don't worry.
All right. Okay.
Don't fear the mic. Just,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for including me.
And was it okay? Was the introduction? Could you catch some of the things?
Yes, I could actually understand quite a bit.
Yeah, because I saw you nodding from the side, so I assumed.
Yes, I can pick up a bit.
Yeah, great. So Erika, I've been throughout these episodes, as I believe I told you when we've chatted about this program before, I've been taking off from a question, just to launch the conversation from a bit of an intimate angle. So I launched the conversation with a question that takes us back a little bit to your childhood. So we know that I explained that you are trained in architecture, you work in the field of architecture, you also write from the perspective of also an architect. And I wanted to know a little bit about where you brought up and perhaps the ingredients in your childhood that brought you to this place today.
So I was born in Italy, but in an area that is a bit of a peripheral area because it's the north of Italy, very close to the border with France.
Okay.
And that I think is probably one of the most influential elements into my upbringing, really, because growing in these peripheral areas.
What was the name of the place?
Mondovì.
Okay, right.
Yeah, in fact, it also sounds a bit French.
Yes, it does.
And it has a strong, obvious French influence. And it really has it puts you in a completely different perspective as to the rest of your country, but also the rest of, let's say, the larger picture. I find that it really gives you a drive to emancipate yourself from stereotypes that you might not have when you are sort of at the center already.
So you feel that like you were brought up as a child feeling conscious that you are at the periphery of something. How so, for example? How would this come across?
Very much, because it's this type of, I will use the word provincial.
Okay.
Even though I don't necessarily mean it with a negative connotation.
Right.
Very factual, if you like. So the provincial environment is very obvious as opposed to the urban, the central. Right. And you inevitably measure yourself with what is considered to be the center of your country or the system you belong to. And it's something that I find and I feel a lot here in Malta as well. It's something I'm very familiar with in terms of dynamic, because somehow it's a peripheral area, always at the border between something and something else.
Right.
And I find it extremely challenging and interesting. But I find it also an advantage in many ways, really.
Right. An advantage to your education, to your thinking process. I guess also it springs you forward. It's a stimulant. It's a catalyst, perhaps.
Yes, I would say so. It's a catalyst because, as I was saying earlier, in this type of environments, not to be too sort of like radical about it, but most of the times one would either end up conforming to the stereotype of the provincial or of the periphery, of the specific context, or really strive to emancipate yourself from it. So,
and what brought you then to architecture? Was it something that is in your family, or was it an internal drive?
Not really. My family is more on the engineering side.
Right. Well,
so I really wanted to be a journalist, actually.
Okay.
Which is also part of the reason why I always have a strong interest in the written word, in words in general.
Yes, because I do know you as someone who takes literature seriously, in the sense it's an integral part of your thinking process.
For sure.
As even what you take to the work table is very literary, as in you do carry your literature to the architect's table, I would say.
Very much. And words are crucial to all the stages really of the process of production of architecture, of an architecture project.
Right.
So that's really the part that interests me the most.
Yeah. So thinking from the peripheries today, the book that you brought with you to discuss is Charles Schwereb's Decolonizing the Maltese Mind in Search of Identity, that was published, I believe, last year.
Yes, I believe 2022,
Mitzi Books, 2022. Charles Schwereb is a familiar name. We know him as a veteran broadcaster. He is still active, I believe, on newspapers in terms of what he contributes there in terms of articles, but he also publishes in the field of history. And so this book, before we kind of plunge in to talk a little bit about its project and how it breaks down its big project of decolonizing the Maltese mind, can you perhaps tell me how you came about it, why you picked it off the shelves to not only start reading it, but then actually bring it here to discuss? And also perhaps we can look at a bit at the chapters, just to get to give an idea out there what it consists of. Because incidentally, I was just having a chat with a few journalists now, and they said that they've been spotting this book on the shelves. It's been catching their attention, but they've shied away from reading it because it feels too academic and it's not something they can handle after a long day at work. And I just said, give it a shot, because as we'll try to show, it also has, it takes its mission seriously, but it is an approachable text, and it's also fun in the way, because it's a little bit provocative as well in the in its certain contestations. It's fun. But tell me a little bit about why you brought it with you, and then give me a brief idea of what it's about.
Actually, I spotted it at the festival organized by the Book Council last November.
Yeah, right. Okay, so it was there.
It was there, exactly, and it obviously catches your eye. It's a very direct title, in the sense it really declares straight away what the mission is, what the perspective is, and it's a topic that always interested me a lot. Partly because of what I was saying earlier, of this sort of tendency that one has when at the periphery to measure yourself towards the center, and when here in Malta, it's never quite clear what the center is or should be. And this tendency to sometimes still look very much to the UK as the center and to London as the ultimate point of reference is something that always interested me.
Right.
So when I saw this, I was like, okay, so there's definitely a debate in relation to what the center is or should be. So that is, I would say, the main reason why I picked it up.
So to you, it felt like a window to a debate that you were underexposed to?
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Exactly. A debate that I find is perhaps just in the architecture field, because I think in the historical and other academic fields, perhaps it's a bit more present, but in the architecture field, for sure, it is not really touched upon much.
Right.
So the book is actually not so academic in the sense like it's not something that requires the type of effort. It's a brilliant source of references, very diverse as well.
For example, references spanning what?
Spanning from articles from the Times of Malta all the way to
across the decades.
Across the decades,
yes.
exactly. So yes,
in fact, I also had that experience that in terms of an introduction to where we can go to find sources that touch upon this, I think it's a very diverse well of references. In the
very
sense, it's
diverse.
Not just academic texts. They are there, they're present, but there are also journalistic ones as well.
Journalistic ones, historical ones, archival material is referenced as well. And it's great also because it allows anyone really who's not too familiar with the topic or with anthropology or the field more in general to really be able to step in this type of research in a very accessible way. So
shall we have a look at the chapters just to see, for example, what topics? I know that we're going to that one of the chapters that you picked to discuss was the chapter on British colonial monuments of
propaganda monuments.
Exactly, propaganda monuments. But what else is in there? So I saw something, because I didn't have time to read it all. I know I read 2 chapters, introduction and conclusion. It
really introduces the topic from a historical perspective. So the first 2 chapters really are about empires. So the first chapter, in fact, is called Empires Rule the World, a historical overview. The second chapter is about the experience of Malta as a British colony.
Yeah, because the book does focus when it comes to the colonial experience. It does locate it there. The 200 years of British rule. So
yes,
that needs to be made clear. It's obviously made very clear in the the cover.
Yes, but it is true that it doesn't in any way touch upon the Knights era and everything, let's say, of colonial nature that happened before the British.
Yes, it makes its mission pretty clear, and it's understandable as well that it would be a very big
that's challenge. That's it.
But for example, that chapter which says Malta from London to Brussels, is that what is that about?
Yes, because again, it is organized in a chronological way.
Right.
So it does also follow, not fully, but it does also follow historically. So what was the political development of Malta all the way to joining the European Union, obviously.
Okay. So that's
exactly.
Okay.
A Journey into Time Regained is really where he introduces this idea of the possibility that Malta has of creating a new future for itself, a new identity.
In the present moment, you mean?
Exactly, from now onwards. And it also then dives a bit deeper into a couple of topics more specific as to how we should be regaining this time and forge this new identity with respect to monuments and therefore the built environment at large, if you like.
Right.
And also with respect to tourism, because it has been not only recently, I mean, quite, I would say, traditionally, a pillar of Maltese economy and also a pillar of how the Maltese project themselves abroad. So almost like a filter, an exercise.
Yeah, in fact, I found that interesting, that the closing note is on how the way we interact as a nation with tourism as a capital, as an opportunity for a capital, how a colonialist mindset tends to lodge inside there as well. And there is
hugely.
So that is the end point where he continues unpacking this, the main contention that he makes in the book over there. So that's the end point. But let's go back a little bit. As I've just said, to put it very simply, the main contention that he makes here is that the Maltese still suffer from a colonial mindset and still suffer from critical reluctance to engage with the colonial past, its different layers, but critically.
Exactly.
So openly, in a sophisticated manner, in a manner that branches different fields. Now, to go straight to your line of thinking, how do you find that this critical reluctance, but also perhaps this colonial mindset, if you agree with Shwirab's contention, how do you find this reflected in the way we're shaping our built environment today? Well, see an interaction there between a colonial mindset and how we're forging our built environment.
Yes, I see a very direct connection in that respect. Even though, as we said earlier, the discourse on to this kind of reluctance, as you said, to engage critically with our past is never really present in the debates or on the discourse on the built environment. Really, if you look at how the debate of the crisis, because it is a crisis of the built environment in Malta, has evolved over the past, I would say, couple of decades, it always centers around raising awareness about the main issues of overdevelopment, lack of protection of heritage buildings, and it very much always centers around the protest, against something which is happening, but very rarely it focuses on questioning the reasons behind this, so at the root of this behavior.
Right, which if we follow Shwirab's line of thinking, would signal a crisis in identity.
Exactly. I find that the two are very related, and especially when it comes to the approach towards the overdevelopment and all the issues that we have because of overdevelopment, I find it always, I would say, almost a bit shallow how the roots of this issue are never really investigated. And I found that Shwirab does offer an interesting perspective on this, because he speaks a lot about the individualism at the core of the British imperial propaganda. So that type of individualism that was promoted by the British rule for the obvious reasons and the historical reasons, and how that is somehow still lingering on. And it really, I almost see it as a direct consequence, this type of...
So what sort of, can you repeat, what's the idea that he's exploring there of individualism? So where is it coming from in relation to British colonial rule? Do you think so the Maltese society has inherited a way of doing politics which is individualistic?
Well, I wouldn't say just politics. It's more a way of approaching your community,
right?
Your country, your the public thing, more in general, because obviously the colonial propaganda would encourage the opposite of caring for your own community and the public, the res publica, I would call it, more in general.
So when you're actually giving something to your nation, when you're working for something, it's landing in colonial pockets. It's not landing in your own pockets, and therefore...
Exactly. It's this mentality of, therefore, being almost forced to rely on your immediate group of friends and family, because that is all you can trust.
Right.
Because everything else, everything that is public, shared, belongs to somebody else's. So be it a king or a queen, it's something very common in other...
and belongs to not just simply anyone else, but someone who is placing you in a position of subordination.
Of subordination, well. Completely.
Something that struck me that I had thought about, but ages ago, was the fact that he mentions at various points in the book, and I think it's something that comes up in reviews that I saw of the book. I instantly read one by Giovanni Bonello, where he says that there is a certain tendency to look at our colonial history as a mild colonial history, as because there wasn't the outright violence that there was in other countries, then we tend to dismiss the violence of subordination that is, whether it was outright or not, is
very aggressive still.
It's still a form of violence that is intergenerational, that can be on many levels traumatic, and that it's also a very normal research shows consequence of trauma to dismiss it and to not engage with it,
engaging in any way,
and to not know how to engage with it.
Exactly, and I find this again quite clear in when it comes to the approach to, I'm going back to the built environment, in the sense this urge to always prioritize the personal interests, the short-term also personal interests over the long-term interests of the collective, of the community. It is something that I find also goes back to this type of behavior, this type of behavior that is very much of a colonial nature.
Right.
And this lack of an actual revolution against it, because as you rightly mentioned, more than one academic has spoken about the perception of the mild colonization because of the lack of aggressive violence, etc. But then that also translated into a lack of an actual revolution against it. So even the way Malta gained independence,
was mild.
Was mild,
process,
exactly.
Right.
And
so
I think that also
that outright,
and that for sure impacted also the way certain colonial mindsets still linger on.
Right. And so let's delve a little bit into the chapter that I am more familiar with, and that I'm more familiar with it because you pointed me there as well. So it is the chapter on colonial propaganda, which focuses a lot on monuments. And it was a really fun chapter, if a tragic one as well. So he lists, that was fun to read, he lists quite a number of very strange and seemingly, they're quite unimportant plaques, for example, scattered all over Valletta. For example, in the Upper Baracca Gardens and Lower Baracca Gardens. He mentions, for example, the absence of Michele Anton Vassalli from the Upper Baracca Garden, but the presence of a plaque commemorating a British commander and his engineer who died in 1899 in Saloniki. I don't retain the name. He also mentions, for example, a plaque for the secretary of Governor Maitland. He also mentions the fact that, for example, there is not one statue commemorating a Maltese woman in our capital city, but then there is a statue of Queen Victoria, who was very disinterested in Malta. He claims, I haven't checked that claim. So he says she wasn't interested in Malta, she never wanted to come here, and that when she was asked to contribute for the building of the Anglican Cathedral, she refused, he says. So where are you with... So one idea that he has in the book that he puts forward as a way of decolonize, whereas symbolically decolonizing our Maltese minds, is to put these monuments away together, maybe in one either colonial museum or in Hastings Garden. I was just curious, where are you on this debate? It is a debate that's happening a little bit more often on newspapers. I do see it,
and it's also
on social media as well. But where are you on this position? And
yes, it's been a very popular debate also overseas. We've seen it a lot in the US, for example.
After Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. But also in continental Europe, in France, has picked up a lot of interest from the public, from the general public.
Yes, colonial history is a difficult topic all over Central Europe. So
all over, exactly.
This is very much a European issue as well.
Here I think it was centered mostly around the statue of Queen Victoria, the one you mentioned.
Rightly so, the one on the cover.
Rightly so, the one on the cover. Yes,
the cover.
Actually, you're right. Because it stares at the reader. And
let's put it here.
Yes, actually, you can leave it there. But I find that type of debate, again, if it's not rooted into a deeper understanding and critical assessment of colonial history, remains very superficial and doesn't really contribute. Moving a statue, say the statue of Queen Victoria, from in front of the Biblioteca to a dark corner in some side street, it's not really going to contribute to the way we look at our, well, I say our, because I guess by now I feel half Maltese, but
yes.
To our colonial history. It might give a strong sign of a change in perspective, mentality, but it's not going to be enough. So I don't quite believe into this type of symbolic acts when on their own.
Right.
When they don't actually form part of a larger...
Although when I was looking through your notes, I did see that you did underline when he makes mention once or twice a museum of colonial history.
Yes, exactly.
That was something that...
That is something in which I think one could find the right opportunity to then engage into that type of review and study.
And
critical.
You're also opening up a space where perhaps a museum like that can obviously call forth more education around
exactly,
that topic.
For sure. And the very act of grouping these statues into a museum would require a huge curatorial effort that by nature requires some sort of critical thinking to it and researching. And
shall we perhaps read a part from that chapter? It's, I think, was it 401? I think
that was that.
Here it is. Can you read this section, please, just to get an idea of the questions that he generates?
Yes, of
in
course.
In this chapter on monuments.
Yes, I will just go through this paragraph.
Yes.
Why is it that the harbour area does not have a monument to immigration when so many thousands of local families had to distance themselves from their homeland, seeking a living? What about a monument to poverty when so many natives died of hunger? And what about Maltese exiles under British rule, including hundreds of French sympathizers who had to abandon their homes in 1800, including a brain drain of sorts, and Italian supporters who were sent to Uganda during World War II, risking their lives in a war-torn Mediterranean Sea in a trip to Egypt with scarce justice? How is it that Cottonera never thought of erecting a monument to those dockyard workers who lost their lives repairing British ships, even under enemy fire? So this is actually, as we were discussing, is actually really strong because of the way it directly suggests a different type of monuments and therefore a different type of memory in our public spaces.
Thinking. So, in fact, I do believe that this is one of the strengths of the book, that each chapter has so many straightforward questions that set you researching, like who are these Ugandans who were sent to Italy and why? And we, in our few phone calls that we had about this, you also mentioned that there is, however, such a monument at the harbour.
There is, exactly.
So at least we can tick one of these questions of our partly. Can you?
Yes, there is actually a monument in the shape of a small paper ship, obviously made of stone, but that was erected in 2008 after the regeneration of the Valletta waterfront.
Right.
To commemorate all the children that had been sent to Australia. Obviously, the decision would have been taken by the British government. So as part of this sort of policy that they had of shifting almost people around within the Commonwealth.
Okay, so that's the conversation that monument is having there. So this is a topic that we can go on forever about, because there's so much. I do hope that we've been, we've given our audience a bit of a taste of what to expect here. But before we close off, I want you to very briefly just tell me a little bit about your work at the moment. I know that I mentioned one of your articles in the Routledge Handbook of Sustainable Heritage, but what else are you working on at the moment that perhaps ties into the preoccupations of this book?
Yes. Well, I would say probably the most relevant type of work in terms of writing that I'm focusing on at the moment really is to also try and look at other countries that had similar colonial experiences. And when I say similar, mostly from a political perspective, so British colonial experiences, also looking at sub-Saharan Africa and trying to, almost by comparing histories and the way histories have shaped the built environment, try and better understand also our local.
For example, like a place, is there any place you're engaging?
Yes, at the moment I'm looking closely at Accra and the Ghanaian heritage, especially the coastal built heritage of mostly, not only, but mostly of British period. And there is a lot there to look at, especially through the lens of the commercial development of these cities. So we're really looking at Valletta in particular, so the Grand Harbour area, and Accra as mercantile cities that through, let's say, the most important historical phases of their colonial experience had these huge transformations in their built environment, and therefore really through the lens of the economic and political history of the city, try and understand, okay, so what are the real key issues that we face today when handling this type of heritage, and what can we learn from also comparing notes.
Right. That sounds... Yeah,
it sounds challenging.
Challenging, but something that I really look forward to reading, and I do hope that it becomes a writing.
I hope so too.
A text. Not that I wouldn't be interested in an exhibition, but a text would definitely.
Yes, we're at the very beginning of the exercise, so we'll see which shape it will take. But there'll be a lot of writing involved for sure.
Erica, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel,
for being here, and I look forward to this project coming to fruition, as I said.
Thank you.
Nirringrazzjakom tal-li segwejtuna. Markapaġna jixxandar nhar ta' tlieta fis-sitta fuq il-pjattaformi soċjali tal-Kunsill Nazzjonali tal-Ktieb ta' MaltaToday, u bħala audio ssibuh ukoll fuq Spotify u fuq Apple Podcasts.
Nirringrazzjaw lil Dinġera Salons li huma l-sponsors ta' dan il-programm.